Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Poirot faced his most confusing web of lies, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Widow's Scream at Midnight. The scream shattered the quiet, like glass thrown against stone, raw, guttural, echoing through the long, drafty corridors of Langford Hall. It was a woman's scream, high and keening, the kind that doesn't come from the throat, but from the soul. And it came, precisely, at 12 minutes past midnight. Lightning flared in the sky above the estate, etching the trees into skeletal shadows. The wind howled against the gables as if to answer the scream, while the ancient grandfather clock in the vestibule gave a sluggish 13th chime. Somewhere upstairs, hurried footsteps scrambled. A door slammed. A voice gasped, "No! Oh God, no!" Hercule Poirot stood by the parlor fireplace, the embers still crackling faintly in the grate behind him. He had not gone to bed, though the hour was indecent. Something in the air tonight had disturbed his sense of order. He had been pacing the drawing room, distracted by the misalignment of a brass candlestick on the mantel, just slightly skewed from center. Now his head turned toward the stairs, calm and deliberate. Midnight, he murmured to himself. How theatrical. How very English. There came the pounding of boots on the floor above, shouts, more doors creaking open. Poirot moved with measured grace toward the grand staircase. His silk slippers made no sound. The air smelled of lilac perfume, candle wax, and something faintly metallic. At the top of the stairs, Mrs. Henrietta Langford, the widow, stood in her nightgown, pale and shaking, her hand clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide and wild, her other hand pointing behind her, trembling. "He's dead," she whispered. "My husband is dead. In his study. I saw someone leave. A shadow. A man in the corridor. But I don't." Poirot offered no interruption. He only inclined his head. "Please, madame. Sit. You are safe now." The house had awakened. Servants huddled in doorways. Major Langford, the dead man's brother, came thundering up the stairs in his dressing gown, his face red with shock and whiskey. In the study, Reginald Langford, former ambassador, art collector, and known manipulator of human desires, lay slumped across his desk. A single clean wound pierced the left side of his chest. A letter opener, thin, ornate, made of ivory and gold, jutted from the wound like a cruel bookmark. Blood had soaked into the carpet beneath him, pooling in silence. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, stepping into the room. "It is not only the knife that kills, but what it represents." The windows were shut tight. No sign of forced entry. One window pane was slightly ajar, odd, given the storm. The glass bore no fingerprints, but Poirot saw a single red thread caught in the latch. He turned slowly, studying the room like a conductor, listening to the opening bars of a symphony. There was a misplaced chair, a forgotten cigarette holder, a half-finished brandy glass, and a chessboard beside the desk, still mid-game. In the hallway behind him, Hastings arrived, disheveled and bleary-eyed. "My God, Poirot," he said, peering past him. "Is that—" "Yes, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft. It is murder. Acting with swift authority, Poirot closed the study door. No one is to enter this room, not until the police arrive. But first, I must ask, where was everyone tonight? Major Langford crossed his arms, eyes sharp. I was in my room, drinking and reading. Heard the scream, ran upstairs. I've no idea who would want Reginald dead, but the man had enemies, no doubt. The widow's voice quivered. I went to bed early. I had a headache, but I heard something. Movement. Someone in the corridor. I swear it. Poirot nodded gently. And the staff. Mrs. Greeley, the elderly housekeeper, appeared at the door, her eyes brimming with tears. Sir, I was in the kitchen. I heard nothing until she screamed. Then there was Clara Devlin, the niece. Young, calculating, too beautiful for her own good. She stood at the landing in a silk robe, cigarette in hand, watching it all like a scene from a play. I was in the library, she said, alone, before you ask. I couldn't sleep. Poirot said nothing, but he noticed the red thread on her sleeve. It matched the one caught in the window latch. Later, as the body was examined and the police delayed by the storm, Poirot sat in the study again, alone with the quiet corpse of Reginald Langford. He turned to the chessboard. White king in check. Black queen moved recently, but no logical follow-up. Curious, Poirot leaned in and sniffed the brandy. Almond, but not just from the liquor. Arsenic, he murmured. No, that would be too expected. But perhaps bitter almonds. He returned to the glass and touched it gently with his gloved finger. No lipstick, no fingerprints. Ah, but here, there, at the base, the tiniest smudge of white powder. He stood abruptly and moved to the desk. The papers there were mostly correspondence. One was addressed to an Willoughby, a solicitor. Another, unfinished, read, "If anything happens to me, it will not be by accident. Clara is—" The ink trailed off, the pen having fallen to the carpet. Poirot closed his eyes. Ah, human nature, he murmured. It never fails to write its own confession. Outside, lightning crashed again. Poirot stepped into the hall and called the niece. "Miss Devlin," he said, "might I speak with you?" She arched a brow. "Of course." In the drawing room, Poirot gestured for her to sit. "I see you were wearing a red shawl earlier. It left a thread on the window latch. May I ask why you were near the study tonight?" She inhaled her cigarette and exhaled slowly. "I like fresh air. I didn't know that was a crime." "Non, mademoiselle, but murder is." Her face flickered, just once. A twitch, then calm. "You can't prove anything." Poirot smiled. "I do not need to prove anything yet. I only need to understand." By dawn, the storm had passed. The police had arrived. Statements were taken, but Poirot remained still, reflecting. He turned to Hastings. "This crime, it is layered, like the petals of an onion. First, one suspects the widow, then the brother, but the core lies elsewhere." "But who?" Hastings asked. "They all seem to have motive, except perhaps the housekeeper." "Ah, but motive is not enough, mon ami. One must also have opportunity, and the character." Poirot walked to the writing desk again and retrieved the unfinished note. He turned it over and held it to the fire's glow. The heat revealed a second layer, an old-fashioned invisible ink. A name. Clara. When Poirot confronted her once more, she was already packing. "You are too clever," she said bitterly. He nodded. "I am only as clever as the lies I have heard. She laughed, cold. He ruined my mother, drove her mad, and then he brought me here like a pet. I waited. I waited until I could make it look clean. And yet, Poirot said softly, you panicked. The scream, was it for show, or did you regret it? For the first time, she faltered. Her voice cracked. I didn't scream, she said. That wasn't me. Poirot's head turned slowly. No. It hadn't been her. In the stairwell, unnoticed by most, was the housekeeper, Mrs. Greeley. Later, Poirot would discover the truth. Clara had poisoned the drink, yes, but it had not worked quickly enough. Reginald had stumbled, gasping, and had seen her hand on the door. He had reached for the letter opener to defend himself. Mrs. Greeley, loyal to a fault, mad with grief over Reginald's previous dismissal of her son, had entered then and finished what Clara began. It was not one killer, but two, each ignorant of the other, each with their own revenge, and each caught in Poirot's net of logic. When it ended, Poirot stood in the empty drawing-room once more. The wind had stilled, the candle flickered out. He spoke aloud to the silence. It is always the scream, n'est-ce pas, that betrays the soul. But in this case, it was the scream that set us free. And then softly, with a weariness only the truly observant ever feel. Sometimes, Hastings, the heart screams long before the mouth does, and in those screams, we find the truth. Chapter 2, A Teacup That Shouldn't Exist. The moment the porcelain hit the floor, everyone in the room froze. It hadn't been dropped. It had been hurled, shattered deliberately, like a curse expelled into the air. Lady Portia Ashcombe stood by the hearth, her face deathly pale, her hand still trembling as if the weight of the teacup had remained long after she flung it from her fingers. Her eyes were fixed on the shattered shards on the carpet, but she wasn't looking at them. Not really. She was looking at something far older, deeper, something buried. That cup, she whispered, her voice cracking, should not be here. And in that instant, Poirot knew. Not what the mystery was, not yet, but that a great lie had just been told, or rather, broken wide open, like the very cup on the floor. He stepped forward, slow and graceful, as though approaching a dangerous animal. The silence was a velvet noose tightening around the drawing-room of Windermere Grange. The teacup had been brought by the butler, Thomas, on a tray alongside three others. Freshly polished silver, delicate bone china, rose-patterned, each placed before the guests. Lady Portia, her stepson Julian Ashcombe, Julian's fiancée Eliza Greaves, and Colonel Fairfax, a hunting companion with a booming voice and a penchant for secrets. And then there was Poirot, ever the outsider, sipping his tea with precision and purpose, observing, always observing. It had been Eliza who noticed the discrepancy first, her brows knitting faintly. She had said nothing, only stared a moment too long at the fourth cup on the tray, not the one she held, the one that ended up before Lady Portia. Her hand had hovered above it, withdrawn, and then made a deliberate shift. Poirot had seen it all. Now the cup lay in ruins. "I'm sorry," Lady Portia said suddenly, breathlessly, brushing her silver hair back from her temple. "I don't know what came over me. I thought it looked like... Never mind. The storm's given me nerves, that's all." But Poirot's mind, like a well-wound watch, had already begun ticking through the scene. A teacup that triggered such a visceral reaction, that should not exist. Why? He turned slowly toward the butler. "Pardon me, Monsieur Thomas. May I trouble you? The teacup, does it belong to the house set?" Thomas blinked, then looked down. Sir? Yes, yes, of course. Part of the language collection. Been here since the first. Lady Ashcombe, sir. About 1880. Ah, Poirot said with a smile. So old. And yet, so clean, n'est-ce pas? He bent down delicately with a handkerchief and picked up a larger shard. He turned it slightly in the firelight. The rim was cracked, but visible beneath the glaze was a faint monogram. Not the language pattern, something else. A crest. He straightened, sharp eyes glancing between Lady Portia and Eliza. The room felt a shade colder. Colonel Fairfax cleared his throat. Lady Ashcombe, perhaps you ought to rest. The storm's not letting up. Might be best to sleep this off. Lady Portia shook her head. No, I'll stay. Julian said nothing. He stared into his cup, shoulders tense, fingers tight. His face bore the rigidity of a man trying to control every muscle in his body. Poirot turned to Hastings, standing nearby. Mon ami, would you fetch Inspector Lyle? I believe he is still in the estate office, reviewing the Langford case files. Hastings blinked. Of course, but do we need a police inspector for a broken teacup? Precisely because it is broken, Poirot replied, and because it was never meant to be here. As Hastings left, Poirot turned once more to the others. You see, my friends, he said gently, there is a truth hidden here, and I suspect that cup was about to reveal it. No one spoke. The rain began to beat heavier against the leaded windows. A long, low creak sounded from the floor above, like an old house shifting uneasily under the weight of its secrets. Later that evening, Poirot found Eliza Greaves in the library. She was alone, seated by the high-backed armchair, a book open in her lap, unread. The fire glowed warmly behind her, but her eyes were cold. You saw it too, she said without turning her head. I did, Poirot replied. I knew that pattern. I saw it when I was a girl. My father kept a set locked in the attic. He said it belonged to her, but I never knew who her was. Not until I came here, not until I met Lady Portia. Poirot stepped closer. Then you believe the cup belonged to your family? Eliza finally looked up. No, I believe it belonged to my mother. The mother Lady Portia once called her dearest friend. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Ah, and friends can be such convenient words. She smiled bitterly. Until one sleeps with the other's husband and sends the mother away. Now the storm inside matched the one outside. Act 2 had begun. Inspector Lyle arrived with his usual skepticism, but Poirot had already gathered the house's key players. He brought them to the drawing room, where the broken shards now sat on a silver tray, their floral design mocking the silence. I ask each of you, Poirot said, to tell me what you know of the language set. Colonel Fairfax shrugged. Never seen that pattern in my life. I drink from mugs, not china. Julian finally spoke. We've had that set for years. It's in the East Cabinet. But not this one, Poirot corrected. This cup is not from the language set. It belongs to a different collection entirely. One I suspect was hidden until very recently. All eyes turned to Lady Portia. Her voice was thin. There was a time, long ago. I did have a set like that. My mother's. She left it to me. But it was lost. Or so I thought. Poirot's voice sharpened. Was it lost or locked away? Perhaps with other memories you preferred to forget? She did not answer. Lady Portia, Poirot continued softly, was there ever a woman named Madeline Greaves in your life? The name hit like a stone tossed into still water. Julian sat bolt upright, Eliza's eyes welled. Portia closed her eyes. Yes, she was my cousin, my dearest friend. And then she fell in love with Reginald Langford. He married me, not her. There were complications. Complications such as a child? Poirot asked quietly. She nodded. So Eliza is my daughter's daughter, Portia whispered. My granddaughter. Eliza gasped, stumbling back as if struck. You knew? She asked. Portia looked at her with a pain so raw it defied time. I only found out after you became engaged to Julian. Hastings, who had returned in time to hear the confession, blanched. Then, there... No blood between them, Poirot assured. Julian is Reginald's son from his second marriage. Eliza comes from Madeline's line. But, emotionally, the tangle is undeniable. Poirot moved slowly around the room. And so we arrive at the twist, he said. The cup was placed not by accident, but with intention. To trigger memory, to reveal something, but by whom? Colonel Fairfax stood, his voice rising. Not me. I was barely here when the tea was served. Poirot turned, suddenly sharp. But you were here last night. In the attic, I saw the dust disturbed, and you, Colonel, are a known gambler. Debts, desperation. You search for something. Letters, perhaps? Old correspondence? Fairfax deflated. Yes. Damn you. I needed money. I remembered hearing about the Ashcombe dowry. I thought perhaps old letters might fetch a price. But you found more, Poirot said. You found the tea set. And you used it to provoke the old lady's guilt. But someone beat you to it. Someone placed the cup. Now Poirot turned to Julian. I had the china cleaned, Julian said slowly. It was part of an inventory. I didn't know it would cause this. But you knew the crest, Poirot pressed. You knew it wasn't from your father's side. Julian stood in silence. And then Poirot delivered the final twist. No, mes amis. It was not Julian, nor Eliza, nor the Colonel. It was the butler, Thomas. Everyone turned. Thomas stepped forward, his face unreadable. She should know, he said simply. Miss Eliza, she had a right to know who she was, and what they did to her. Mother. Lady Portia's face twisted in sorrow. She begged me not to speak of it, Thomas continued. But I could not watch the lies any more. Poirot nodded solemnly. Sometimes, he said, a lie is wrapped in silk. But the truth, it clinks like porcelain, and cuts when broken. The room held its breath, and Poirot, brushing a shard back onto the tray, whispered, it was never just a teacup. It was a ghost, waiting to shatter. That night, Eliza did not sleep, nor did Portia. The storm outside passed, but the storm within had only begun. And Poirot, as he packed to leave Windermere Grange, turned to Hastings and said, Mon ami, you see, it is not always murder that wounds the soul. Sometimes it is a forgotten name, on the bottom of a cup. Chapter 3. The maid swore. She never opened the door. The sound of splintering wood tore through the silence like a scream. It wasn't the wind, though the wind howled mercilessly outside. It was something inside, something sudden, violent. The door to the West Wing study had been forced open, its antique lock fractured, and beyond it, lying awkwardly against the bureau, was the lifeless body of Alistair Winthrop, barrister, skeptic, and by all accounts, the man who knew too much. The lamp still flickered where it had fallen on its side, casting a trembling light across the dark green carpet and the scattered pages of a torn letter. Outside, lightning cracked, illuminating the rain-streaked windows and sending long shadows skittering across the panelled walls. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper, blood, and something subtler, a trace of perfume, faint but deliberate, out of place in a room otherwise reserved for cigar smoke and scotch. Poirot did not flinch at the sight of the body. He entered the study with quiet grace, his eyes already scanning, no, reading, the room like a book he had read before, but needed to re-examine line by line. He knelt beside the body, noting the angle of the head, the way one hand reached toward the hearth as if for help, or perhaps to retrieve something dropped. But the fire had gone out. Only a few embers pulsed in the ashes. The storm outside gave no quarter. Thunder rattled the crystal on the dining room chandelier, and the grandfather clock in the hall ticked too loudly, as if counting down the final seconds of a dying truth. In the corridor stood Mrs. Standish, the housemaid, barefoot, eyes wide, her apron spotted with flour. "I didn't open the door," she whispered, before anyone asked. "I swear it, Mr. Poirot. I passed by. I saw it was shut, same as always. Then I heard it, like a crack, like someone struck it open from inside." Poirot rose slowly, gaze steady. "Madame, in this house where every door squeaks, every board groans, and every key sticks, you expect me to believe you heard only the final sound." "I didn't open it," she insisted again, her voice rising to near panic. "I was in the scullery. Ask Martha. Ask the Colonel. I never touched that door." But Poirot had already stopped listening to her words. Instead, he watched her hands. One still clenched her apron, a gesture of instinct. The other brushed her collar, where a single button was undone, revealing a faint red line across her neck. Pressure from something. A necklace hastily removed? In the drawing room, the family gathered again, under duress. The mistress of the house, Eleanor Winthrop, widow to a man not yet buried. Her son Henry, a brittle academic with a talent for silence, and Beatrice Mayfair, the cousin, charming, careless, and lately very wealthy, thanks to a codicil that Alistair had been rumoured to question. Poirot entered the room like a quiet storm. His gaze touched each face, lingering just long enough to stir discomfort. "There has been another death," he said plainly. Gasps, a hand raised to a mouth. Beatrice dropped her teacup, which cracked, ironically, along the same pattern as the previous day's infamous teacup. Eleanor paled. Henry turned sharply toward the fire, jaw clenched. "The study door was locked," Poirot continued, "or appeared to be, and yet our barrister lies inside, his head broken, and the door unlatched from within." "It was suicide," Henry said quickly. "The man was unstable, guilt-ridden. Perhaps he—" "No," Poirot interrupted, gently but firmly. "Suicide does not wear perfume, and it does not begin writing a letter it will never finish, nor does it break its own lock from the inside." He turned to the maid, who had been summoned in again. "Mrs. Standish, if I may ask, who else has a key to that study?" "Just the master," she said, almost inaudibly, "and the mistress, no one else." Poirot nodded. "Then someone has lied, either you or them, and I intend to find out which." As the investigation deepened, Poirot made his rounds through the manor like a surgeon through a body, examining, listening, prodding gently until the secrets began to bleed. Henry claimed he had been in the conservatory, reading, but the rain had made no splash marks on the stone. Strange, given the leak that Poirot found dripping near the window. Beatrice claimed she had retired early, and yet her shoes were damp, and a silk shawl lay drying near the fire. Eleanor had no alibi, only tears. "I can't believe it," she said softly. "Alistair was difficult, but not hated. Not really. He upset people, yes. He had a way of getting under one's skin, but he was loyal." "To whom?" Poirot asked. She looked away. "To the truth." That, Poirot thought, was the most dangerous loyalty of all. The letter found near the body was torn, only the first few lines legible. "I cannot remain silent. The events of the summer of 29 must come to light. If anything should happen to me, it will not be because I tripped over old rugs or choked on sentiment." Poirot spent the afternoon in the study, examining the lock. It had indeed been forced from the inside, but not with a key, with something heavier, a fire iron perhaps, or a boot. He examined the grain of the wood. Splinters angled outward. The pressure had come suddenly. Rage, panic, and then there was the faint trace on the floor, ash mixed with something darker, a drop of blood, no, ink, spilled in haste, but not from the desk, from the hearth. He looked inside. There, partly burned, was the corner of a document. Legal parchment. He extracted it carefully, reconstructing just enough to read, "If said heir is proven to be illegitimate." Act 2 was nearly at its end. The house heir, Henry, poised to inherit, unless someone proved otherwise. Beatrice, recently appearing with a family claim of her own. Eleanor, the widow, protector of the family image. And the maid, Mrs. Standish. She had once been a governess. That night, Poirot gathered them all in the library. The storm outside had finally begun to die, but inside, the thunder still rolled. "You will forgive me," he began, "but this house has too many ghosts, too many lies, and tonight we bury more than the barrister. We bury the version of the past you have all agreed to maintain." He looked first at Henry. "You knew, didn't you, about Beatrice, that she might be your half-sister, that your father had rewritten his will, but Alistair objected." Henry's face remained still, but his fingers gripped the arm of his chair too tightly. "And you, Beatrice, you found the draft, tried to burn it, but someone got to Alistair before he could reveal the truth." She laughed bitterly. "I came here for what was mine." "And Eleanor," Poirot's voice softened, "you knew most of all, because the man you once loved, before your husband, was Alistair, and he had begun to remember too much. He wanted to confess, to make things right." She said nothing. "But it was none of you," Poirot concluded, to their shock. He turned to the maid. "Mrs. Standish, or should I say, Margaret Wexley," her face drained of colour, her knees buckled. "You see, I knew the name, from the servant registry of 1929. You were more than a maid. You were the child's mother, the one cast out when the family honour was at risk." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "I never meant to kill him. I just wanted him to stop lying about my daughter, about Beatrice. He promised me justice." "You followed him to the study," Poirot said quietly. "He threatened to tear it all up again. You panicked, struck him." She nodded once. "I didn't mean to. I didn't. I swear I didn't open the door." Poirot stepped back. "No," he said, "but you closed it. You closed it behind you, and tried to lock the past away." And in the silence that followed, Poirot whispered to Hastings, "Even the smallest door, mon ami, can hide the largest of betrayals." Outside, the storm passed at last. But inside Windermere Grange, The air would never be the same again. Chapter 4. He lied about the garden key. The scent of lavender and blood never quite blends, no matter how the wind tries to stir the garden. That was the first thing Poirot noted as he stepped into the moonlit path leading to the south hedgerow of Wrenwood Estate. The night was windless, the air unnervingly still, and the rain from earlier had left the cobbled walkway damp and slick beneath his patent leather shoes. A shadow moved near the greenhouse, a whisper of fabric brushing against glass. Then there was the scream, not loud but abrupt, as if someone had been startled into remembering what they had hoped to forget. The body was found not 10 minutes later. Harrison Vale, the estate's elusive cousin and temporary groundskeeper, lay twisted against the cold stone border of the herb garden, one arm bent unnaturally beneath him, the other stretched toward the now broken greenhouse door. His expression, frozen in that final gasp, held confusion more than fear, as if death had caught him in a lie and demanded an explanation he could not give in time. Poirot stood above the body, untouched by the panic of the gathering household. The candlelight from the rear veranda spilled over the scene, wavering against the petals of nearby roses that had been crushed underfoot. Something had happened here, something silent and sudden. There were no signs of struggle, no weapon, no drag marks. Just Vale, his neck broken, and the door, ajar, glass shards at his feet. Poirot knelt, adjusting the cuffs of his grey wool coat delicately as he examined the body. His shoes, he murmured, too clean for a gardener. Inspector Radley, recently summoned from the village station, watched with interest. "You think he wasn't working tonight?" "I think," Poirot said, lifting a pair of gardening gloves from Harrison's back pocket, "he was pretending to be someone he was not." The inspector frowned. "Might have slipped coming out." "Whetstone." Poirot nodded faintly. "Perhaps. But then why was he going into the greenhouse at night, with gloves in his pocket instead of on his hands, and with his lantern left unlit on the ground 20 feet away?" The house had begun to stir. Guests murmured behind the tall hedges, craning for a glimpse of the scene. Among them were Lady Rosalind Vale, mistress of the estate and recently widowed sister-in-law to the deceased; Philip Ward, a nervous estate solicitor with an unfortunate moustache; and Isadora Lane, Rosalind's companion and former nurse, whose eyes rarely left the windows. Poirot stood and turned to Radley. "There is one detail that troubles me most of all," he said. "The garden gate." Radley raised a brow. "What about it?" "It is locked," Poirot said, "and Harrison claimed earlier today, quite plainly, that he had the only key. And yet, the killer had entered and exited without detection. So either Harrison had lied, or someone else had lied for him." Later that evening, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing-room, the fire crackling, the windows fogged with the remnants of the storm. The scent of the roses still clung to the fabric of the guests' clothing, but now it mingled with something heavier: fear, suspicion. "Forgive me," Poirot began, "but the question is not simply who killed Harrison Vale, but why he was there at all. You see, I believe he was trying to hide something, or retrieve something hidden." Lady Rosalind straightened her back. "Harrison was not a thief." "Non," Poirot said gently, "but perhaps he was a messenger, or a witness." He turned to Philip Ward. "You mentioned this afternoon that the codicil to Lord Vale's will had been misplaced. Might it have been found in the garden, hidden, perhaps, by Harrison?" Ward hesitated. "I suppose it's possible. He had access." Poirot smiled tightly. Ah, but you see, monsieur, he said he did not. He claimed to have the only garden key, yet the gate shows signs of frequent use. The latch was oiled recently. There are fresh footprints along the gravel path, not matching his shoe size. And most curiously, there is a second key, found in the pocket of Miss Lane. All eyes turned. Isadora Lane rose slowly from her chair, her expression blank. "It's not what it looks like," she said quietly. "He gave it to me, just this morning. Said he was afraid someone would take it from him." Poirot tilted his head. "Why you, mademoiselle?" She looked at Rosalind, then back at Poirot. "Because he knew I was watching." A silence fell. Poirot stepped forward. "Watching whom?" Lane's voice dropped. "Rosalind and Philip. They were planning something. Harrison said it involved papers. A hidden deed. Something that would change the inheritance." Rosalind gasped. "That's a lie." Poirot raised a hand. "Madame, please." Then to Lane. "And why did you not report this?" "I didn't trust him either," she admitted. "He told too many stories. About serving in the war, about secret investments. I thought, if he was killed, it would not surprise me." Poirot gave a short nod, then turned slowly to the fire. "It is time we remove the smoke, non, and see where the fire truly burns." Act 2 had passed. Act 3 would bring the light. The next morning, Poirot walked alone in the garden, the fog of dawn curling low across the grass. Hastings joined him at the hedge. "I don't understand," he said. "Why lie about the key? If he had it, why give it away? Why lie at all?" Poirot turned to his friend. "Because, Hastings, the lie was not about the key. It was about the door." He pointed toward the greenhouse. That door was propped open from inside, which means Harrison was already in the greenhouse when someone came for him. "Then they pushed him?" "No," Poirot said. "They lured him with a message." In the study, Poirot revealed the torn corner of a note, retrieved from Harrison's inside coat pocket. It read, "Meet me where secrets grow." A poetic phrase, a trap. He summoned the household again. This time, he walked them through the crime. The message was meant to draw Harrison. It referenced something only someone close to him would understand. Someone who knew he loved metaphors. Someone like Miss Lane. "I didn't write that," she insisted. "No, you did not. But you spoke it to Rosalind. Earlier that day, I found the matching phrase in your journal." Lane stiffened. Poirot continued. "Lady Rosalind used your words, forged them into bait. She feared Harrison had found something. A deed, yes, but more importantly, proof of her husband's illegitimate child. A child with a claim." He turned to Philip Ward. "You helped cover it. The money transfers, the legal hush. And when Harrison threatened to reveal the truth, Rosalind acted." Rosalind stood, her face pale, but her voice steady. "I didn't kill him." "No," Poirot said softly. "You had him distracted. But it was Ward who pushed him. The gloves were in your pocket. His shoes matched the mud on the path, and the ink on the false deed I found last night matches the pen in your satchel." Ward crumbled. He was going to ruin everything. He said he'd expose the bastard child. He wanted to sell the estate, destroy Rosalind's name. I just meant to scare him." Poirot folded his hands. "And so, to protect a lie, you killed a man who told too many truths." Ward wept. Rosalind turned away. Lane stood frozen, as if her world had been shattered and remade in the same breath. Poirot looked once more to the garden, now blooming under soft sunlight, and he said, "The lie, mon ami, is like a key. It opens the wrong door and locks away the truth." Then softly, as he turned to leave, "But no door stays closed forever. Not when murder is on the other side." Chapter 5. The Portrait That Was Turned to the Wall. The candle guttered violently, as though the portrait itself had exhaled. It was not the storm outside, nor the draught inside, but something older, something that pressed against the very air in the hall as Poirot stood still, his eyes fixed on the painting. It was large, Victorian, the kind meant to dominate a room. But now it faced the wall, deliberately turned, its lacquered back casting a sinister silhouette in the firelight. "Who turned it?" asked Poirot softly, his voice echoing just enough to draw attention. Behind him, the guests of Fairhaven Manor paused in the drawing-room's doorway, uneasy. No one answered. The silence was so total you could hear the wind scratching against the ivy outside. Lady Millicent Carrington finally spoke, her voice hollow. "It was like that when I came down, after the scream." "Ah, yes," Poirot said, stepping closer. "The scream, and the murder that followed. Lord Edgar Carrington was found not 20 minutes earlier, slumped over the marble balustrade of the library's spiral staircase, his neck broken in a fall that no one heard, except perhaps the one who caused it. He had been alone, supposedly asleep, in his private reading nook. A brandy glass sat unbroken nearby. His pipe had rolled down the steps, landing gently at the base of the stone. But what intrigued Poirot most was what wasn't there. His glasses, always perched on his nose, they were nowhere to be found. Now Poirot stood facing the portrait's back, unmoving. "This painting," he said, "hung here for how many years?" "Nearly 80, said Harold Beckett, the estate's keeper of records and an old friend of the family. "It's a Carrington heirloom, Elizabeth Carrington, the governess who never married. She raised 3 generations in this house." "And yet," Poirot said, "someone wished not to look upon her tonight." Beckett shrugged. "The wind, perhaps." Poirot tapped the base of the frame with his finger. "The nails in the carpet have not shifted. This was not accidental. It was turned with intention." And intention, Poirot knew, was never so simple as it appeared. He requested the portrait be lifted back to face the room. 2 footmen hesitated, exchanged glances, and did as asked. And there she was, Elizabeth Carrington, her face stern and clever, her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, her left hand clasping a child's ribbon, faded in the oil to the shade of dried blood. Lady Millicent turned away. The evening progressed like a piano played out of tune, discordant, uneasy. Poirot took supper quietly, then returned to the library alone. He walked the staircase where Edgar had died, studying each tread. It was the 6th step that caught his attention. A faint scuff on the riser, dust displaced, and at the edge a small brass hinge embedded in the wall, meant to latch something. But what? He stepped back and looked at the wall behind the stairs. It was panelled oak, but one section near the bottom had a different sheen. Not recent polishing. No, something else. Something rubbed. He pressed gently. The panel gave way with a click. Behind it, a hollow alcove. Empty, save for a pair of spectacles. Poirot retrieved them, held them to the light. Lord Carrington's. Then, he murmured, it was no fall. Later that night, as lightning lit up the sky in silent flashes, Poirot stood again, Before the portrait, Hastings arrived at his side, rain dripping from his coat. "It's a lovely house, if one ignores the murder," he said lightly. Poirot did not smile. "This house, Hastings, is full of old sins. They are hung on every wall. And this portrait, this one in particular, knows too much. Do you believe the death is tied to it?" "I believe," Poirot said, "that Lord Carrington was not the man everyone believed him to be." By morning, Poirot had made his inquiries. Lady Millicent had been in the solarium, writing letters. Harold Beckett had been drinking port with the groundskeeper in the cellar, and Isabel Carrington, Edgar's much younger cousin, had taken to bed early, claiming a headache. But then came a twist. Poirot received a letter, anonymous, slid under his door during the night. In it, a torn photograph, black and white, faded, a young girl seated beside a much older man. The girl's face bore a striking resemblance to Isabel. The man's blurred, but unmistakably Edgar Carrington. On the back, scrawled in hurried pen, "She never left. She grew up in the walls." Poirot's brow furrowed. He gathered the household. "In this house," he began, "truth has been painted over too many times. But last night, someone tried to erase a portrait, not just of Elizabeth Carrington, but of what she knew." They stared at him, silent. "Lord Carrington did not fall," Poirot said. "He was pushed, and the one who pushed him knew he had discovered something." Poirot turned to Lady Millicent. "You always despised that portrait, did you not? Because it reminded you of your place. You were not born a Carrington. You married into the name. And when Edgar began asking questions about old adoptions, about lineage, you feared what he would find." Millicent gasped. He was obsessed with it. That painting. He said Elizabeth hid a secret in her will. Something about a lost child. An heir who vanished." Poirot nodded. He was correct. He turned now to Isabel. "And that heir, mademoiselle, was you." She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "You were never adopted from a distant cousin. You are Elizabeth Carrington's granddaughter, the last blood heir of this house. Your mother was disowned, her child hidden. But Edgar found records. He traced it back. He laid the torn photograph on the table. But he did not wish to harm you. No, he meant to name you his successor." "Then why?" Isabel's voice broke. "Because someone else did not wish that to happen," Poirot said. "Harold Beckett." The old man stood slowly. "You have no proof." "No? You falsified the estate records, buried the updated will, and when Edgar confronted you, last night, in the study, you followed him to the staircase. He turned away. You saw your moment." Beckett shook his head. "I built this house back to life. It should have gone to me." Poirot said softly, "It never belonged to you, monsieur, not in name, nor in blood." As the police escorted Beckett away, Poirot stood again before the portrait. Elizabeth's eyes seemed calmer now, her gaze steady. Hastings approached. "You think she would be proud?" "I think," Poirot said, "that the dead do not watch us, mon ami, but they wait for justice to turn the picture back to face the living." Then, with a faint smile, he whispered, "Even a wall cannot silence the truth forever." Chapter 6. A glove found beneath the wrong bed. The scream came not from the victim, but from the one who found her. A high, reedy cry that pierced the walls of Ashtonbury Manor and sent the butler skidding down the east hallway in slippers, candle in hand. The wind outside shrieked through the trees like something wild, battering the windows with sleet as if the storm, too, had borne witness. Miss Evelyn Mortlake was sprawled across the edge of the bed in the guest wing, her body limp, her skin deathly pale, her mouth half open in a final breath that never came. But it was not the body that Poirot noticed first. It was the crimson velvet glove, half hidden beneath the bed, lying just beyond the hem of a linen valance. Out of place, and very much in the wrong room. The glove did not belong to Evelyn Mortlake. Poirot knelt, retrieving it delicately with a handkerchief. "Ah," he whispered, "this is not simply lost. It is misplaced. A very different thing. Nessie, pass." Inspector Aldridge arrived 15 minutes later, his coat dripping and his notebook already open. Evelyn, it appeared, had died of poisoning. Conium likely. Hemlock. The teacup beside her was still warm, and yet no cup had been brought to the room that evening, according to the housemaid. There was no tray, no record of supper delivered, and Evelyn, though she was a socialite and a regular visitor at country homes, had requested solitude that evening. A headache, she said, but Poirot, who had watched her closely at dinner, knew something else had been troubling her. Her fingers had trembled slightly when she touched her glass. Her eyes had darted too often to the host, Lionel Montague, and she had laughed too loudly at things not remotely amusing. Lionel Montague, patron of the arts, war veteran, and self-appointed guardian of his late brother's fortune, was a man of charming arrogance. He lived with his wife, Beatrice, and his brother's widow, Claudia, in a state of uneasy grace at Ashtonbury. They were joined that weekend by Gregory Fields, a penniless playwright with expensive tastes, and Margot Henley, Evelyn's best friend, or so she claimed. Poirot gathered them in the drawing-room, where the fire popped and hissed as if offended by the chill. Miss Mortlake, he said, died not by chance. She died by arrangement, and the first thread of this design lies not in her teacup, but in this glove. He placed it on the side table. Red, velvet, lady's size, slightly worn at the edges. Beatrice paled. "That's mine," she said, "but I must have dropped it earlier. I was in her room this morning, helping her find a brooch." Poirot nodded slowly. "Were you also there after dinner?" "No," she replied too quickly. "I went straight to my room." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And your husband?" "Lionel was in the study," she said. "Working." Gregory Fields chimed in, lounging near the fireplace. "Working on what? The man hasn't written a letter since 1912. "I was writing to the trustees," Lionel said evenly, "about estate business." Poirot turned to Claudia, the widow who had been silent until now. "And you, madam?" "I was with Margot," Claudia replied. "We took a walk before the storm hit." Margot nodded. "She's right. We were together until almost 10. "Very well," Poirot said, steepling his fingers. "Then if no one visited Evelyn, who brought her the tea?" The room was quiet. Aldridge cleared his throat. "We'll question the servants again." Poirot didn't respond. He was studying the firelight reflected in the window, watching the faint distortions in the glass. That night, Poirot examined Evelyn's room again. He moved slowly, touching nothing, but seeing everything: a drawer half open, a lockbox empty, a folded letter in the wastebasket, torn but not burned. He pieced it together with care. "You know the truth about Beatrice, about Lionel. I saw them that night by the fountain. It changes everything. If you don't meet me in the green room at 9, I will go to Claudia." Poirot read it twice. At precisely 9 o'clock that night, Evelyn was dead. The next day brought questions, and with them, the lies began to fray. Margot, when pressed, admitted she had argued with Evelyn earlier in the week. She was obsessed, Margot confessed, kept accusing everyone of secrets, always watching. It was exhausting. And yet Poirot said, "She confided in you." Margot looked down. "She tried. I didn't listen." Poirot looked to Claudia. "You knew, didn't you, that Evelyn had discovered something about your late husband's will?" Claudia's eyes flickered. "I suspected." She hinted, but I didn't press. I was afraid. Afraid she might expose things best left buried. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And what might those be? But Claudia said no more. That evening, Poirot met Hastings in the West Corridor. The rain had finally stopped, but the walls still wept from their corners. She was going to expose something, Poirot said, but it was not about money. It was about betrayal. The glove tells us this. Hastings blinked. Because it was in the wrong room? No, mon ami, Poirot replied, because it was placed, not dropped. A woman's glove beneath the bed of a single woman, intended to suggest a lover, but too carefully positioned. It was not missed by accident. It was planted. To humiliate. Hastings frowned. But why? Poirot's eyes hardened. Because the real secret was not an affair, but an identity. That night, Poirot asked Lionel to join him in the study. The fire burned low. Shadows stretched long. "You served in the war," Poirot began. "You saved a man named James Fielding." Lionel stiffened. "Yes. What does that have to do with this?" "You adopted his identity. After he died, you took his commission, his medals, and his life." "That's absurd." Poirot held up a photograph. "Then why do the military records list your blood type as a B, and your medical chart at the Ashford Clinic lists you as O negative?" Lionel was silent. "You're not Lionel Montague. You're James Fielding. You assumed his life to escape debts, and Evelyn found out." Poirot continued, before Lionel could speak. "She found the birth record, the clinic entry. The letter to the trustee wasn't about money, it was about legitimacy. She realized that you were not the legal heir to the Montague fortune, and that would have made Beatrice's marriage invalid. All of it. A lie." Poirot stepped forward. "You tried to discredit her. You had Beatrice place the glove. You prepared the tea. But she wouldn't drink. Until you told her. Something cruel. Something personal. And then she did." Beatrice, who had entered unnoticed, whispered, "You said she was unwanted. That she was always the outsider. That she had no one." Lionel's face was grey. "She believed you," Poirot said, "and it killed her." Silence filled the room. Poirot turned to Aldridge. "Take him." Beatrice covered her face. Claudia turned away. Outside, the wind had died, but the truth had left its mark. Poirot walked the east corridor, alone, the glove in his pocket. And softly he said to no one, "Ah, but a lie, like a glove, fits only until the fingers of truth pull it inside out." Chapter 7. The clock chimed too late. The 13th chime was what stopped everyone cold. It shouldn't have happened, couldn't have happened. Yet, as the last dull echo faded into the silence of Greystone Hall, all eyes turned toward the grandfather clock, standing solemn at the end of the great corridor, its brass pendulum still swaying as though nothing at all were amiss. And then came the second shock. The body at its base, crumpled like a marionette, with its strings cut, Professor Aldwyn Keene, his spectacles shattered beneath his cheek, his left hand stretched toward the timepiece as though trying to warn it, stop it, or perhaps accuse it. Somewhere in the room, a woman gasped. Then silence, thick and stunned. Poirot stood still. He had been midway through his cocoa, prepared just as he liked it, dark, no sugar, when the chime rang out at exactly 1 minute past midnight. He had counted. So had the clock. 12 chimes, and then, inexplicably, 13. Moved now, slowly, the candlelight catching on the sharp crease of his collar, his eyes already scanning, calculating. The professor's death, though sudden, was not as it appeared. A fall, perhaps, but the angle of the head, the twist in the torso, it was a collapse, not a stumble. Poison, possibly, but his lips were clear, his breath undisturbed. It had come too quickly, and too clean. The clock, murmured Hastings behind him, must be broken. No, said Poirot quietly, not broken, mon ami, tampered with. The others had gathered now. Sir Nathaniel Lorne, the host and patron of the Greystone Society, his daughter Eliza, sharp as her cheekbones and twice as cold, and Martin Bellamy, Keane's longtime academic rival, whose expression flickered between grief and disbelief. Poirot straightened. Who was the last to see the professor alive? I was, said Eliza. We were discussing his paper in the conservatory. He left around 11:45. Martin stepped forward. No, that's not right. He came to the library after that. I found him searching the archive shelves, said he was looking for a manuscript Sir Nathaniel promised him. Which manuscript? Poirot asked. The Calder letter, Sir Nathaniel said stiffly. An old estate document, worth nothing but dust and ink. A curiosity. Curiosities, monsieur, Poirot replied, are often the most dangerous things in an old house. Aldridge, the inspector called once more to tragedy, began to take statements. But Poirot had already begun to unravel the clockwork. The clock itself was ancient, a gift from Queen Anne, or so Sir Nathaniel boasted. It had been wound precisely every Sunday evening for over a century. No servant touched it, but Mr. Finch, the house steward. And yet someone had altered its chime, a deliberate 13th note meant to signal something, or someone. Poirot studied the professor's pockets. One contained a chess piece, the White Knight. The other, a page torn from a journal, dated the night before. I have found the proof. Tonight, I show Nathaniel. He must know. Eliza will hate me, but the truth is older than loyalty. That evening, Poirot visited the study. It was cluttered but carefully arranged, books, ledgers, polished decanters. And on the mantel above the hearth, a family portrait, Sir Nathaniel, a younger Eliza, and a boy. Not Martin, not anyone he recognized. Poirot leaned closer. The boy's face was oddly familiar. Then he saw the name beneath, Daniel Lorne, 1910 to 1928. A son who died young, and then forgotten, or not. In the hall, the grandfather clock ticked on, solemn and even. Poirot summoned Eliza to the solarium. The moonlight fell in cold slivers across the floor, and she seemed paler than before. Tell me about your brother, Poirot said gently. Her face froze. He drowned, she replied, in the lake. He was 18. It was an accident. And yet, Poirot said, his name is barely mentioned in this house. Not by your father, not by the staff. She looked away. Because he was not my father's son. Poirot blinked. Ah, now we begin to hear the gears turn. Eliza's voice was bitter. He was born of an affair. My mother never recovered. And father, he resented Daniel's existence. The boy was sent away to school, then drowned, when he came home one summer. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Are you saying it was not an accident? I don't know, she said, but Keene believed it wasn't. He turned to Hastings later and said, There are 3 motives, mon ami: revenge, inheritance, and silence, and one of them struck tonight. Act 2 began with the discovery of a second clock, not in the corridor, but in the cellar, an exact replica of the grandfather clock hidden behind a false wall in the wine vault. Poirot found it as Finch unlocked the cellar at his request. A practice piece, Finch said. I maintain it to test the chimes. Never told anyone. Yet someone knew, Poirot murmured, and someone altered it here, so the main clock would echo its flaw. The professor had known too much about Daniel, about the will, about the Calder letter, which Poirot found tucked inside a hollowed-out volume of Spinoza in the library. It was not dust and ink. It was a confession. Sir Nathaniel had forged the trust that kept Eliza sole heir. The original document granted half the estate to Daniel, or his issue. There it was. Poirot returned to the study, where Martin Bellamy waited. I knew Daniel, Martin said suddenly. He didn't drown. He ran away, joined a ship's crew under a false name. I met him years later. He'd changed. He was dying. He asked me to give Keene the letter. Why didn't you? Poirot asked. Because I loved Eliza, he said, and I couldn't ruin her. Poirot stared. And now? She's already ruined, he whispered. Act 3 began as the storm rolled back in, cloaking the house in darkness again. Poirot gathered them by the hearth. The 13th chime, he began, was a signal, a moment chosen to match the time of Daniel's death. It was meant to summon someone, or frighten them. And it worked. He faced Eliza. You confronted Keene in the library. He told you the truth, that Daniel had lived, that your inheritance was threatened. I didn't kill him, she cried. No, Poirot said gently, but you lied. You weren't in the conservatory. You followed him to the corridor. You saw someone strike. His eyes moved to Finch. The steward. Finch's hands trembled. He knew, Poirot said. He'd served the family for decades. Daniel was like a son. He protected his secret. And when Keene tried to expose it, you silenced him. For the family I had to, Finch said quietly. He would have torn this house apart. Poirot's voice turned sharp. But you see, monsieur, that house was already broken years ago. Silence. Finch was led away. Eliza stared at the clock. Why would someone make it chime 13? To remind the guilty, Poirot said, that time cannot be altered, only delayed. And with a final glance at the pendulum's eternal sway, he whispered, the clock chimed too late, but the truth, it is always on time. Chapter 8. A love letter in a dead man's pocket. The letter was still folded neatly, tucked inside the inner breast pocket of a blood-stained waistcoat. It bore no stamp, no envelope, only the scent of old perfume and something far more desperate, the quiet intensity of a truth never meant to be discovered. Poirot did not touch it at first. He simply stared, as though by the weight of his gaze alone he could read its contents, its history, and the lies that had tried to bury it with the man now lying face down at the foot of the garden terrace. The body belonged to Thomas Everley, solicitor to the Braithwaite estate, and one of the few men in Devonshire who could navigate both the ledgers and the secrets of the Braithwaite family with equal poise. He had been missing since dusk, his absence noted only when the brandy service went untouched in the study, a room Thomas never avoided. Now he was here, beneath the shattered glass lantern on the garden steps, his temple bruised, neck bent at an unnatural angle. No struggle, no blood beyond the fall. But Poirot, standing beneath the moonlit trellis, knew, before he touched the man's collar, that this was no accident. The angle of the scarf was wrong. The scuff on his left shoe was fresh. And the letter, the letter. It had not belonged in that pocket. Not his. Someone placed it there, Poirot murmured. But why hide love in the coat of the dead? Hastings, who had been pacing nervously nearby, glanced down. You think he didn't write it? Poirot didn't answer. He reached carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was smooth, practiced, feminine. My darling, I cannot pretend any more. I will leave him. I will tell them everything. Meet me where we first kissed. The maze, at midnight. You know the way. Burn this after reading. Yours always, C. C. There were 3 women at Braithwaite Hall whose names began with C. Lady Cassandra Braithwaite, the matriarch, Celia Braithwaite, her widowed daughter-in-law, and Caroline Harrow, the newest guest and perhaps the least known. Poirot turned slowly toward the great house, where the lights of the drawing-room flickered through gauze curtains. The scent of lavender and burning wood drifted on the cold night air. Inside, someone was lying. He just didn't yet know which of them. He entered the drawing-room with the solemnity of a priest. The guests had already gathered. Lady Cassandra sat by the fire, a glass of sherry in hand, her expression carefully composed. Celia stood at the sideboard, pale but poised, her hands trembling only slightly as she poured tea. Caroline, in a jade silk gown, leaned against the window frame, watching the darkness as though trying to make it disappear. Poirot cleared his throat. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, I regret to inform you that Mr. Everley has met with an accident, a fatal one. There was silence. Then Cassandra spoke. How dreadful. Where? In the garden, Poirot replied. Near the maze. Celia gasped too quickly. And how? Asked Caroline, her voice low. He fell, but he did not fall alone. Poirot stepped forward, watching their faces. There was a letter in his pocket, a personal letter, signed with only an initial. He saw it then. One blink too long from Celia. A slow, deliberate exhale from Cassandra, and the faintest twitch of Caroline's fingers. The storm of suspicion was already gathering. That night, Poirot returned to the garden. The path to the maze was still damp from the evening dew. Footprints crisscrossed along the gravel. He followed them, torch in hand, weaving between high hedges and silent stone cherubs. At the center of the maze stood a marble bench, slick with moisture. Upon it, an imprint, a fold in the dust. Someone had sat here recently. He leaned down, brushing away the grime. And beneath the bench, barely visible, a crushed rose, petal, deep red, still fragrant, not from the maze, from the bouquet in the drawing room. Caroline's bouquet. The next morning, Poirot asked to speak with each of the 3 women in private. Cassandra came first, regal, unreadable. Did you know Thomas Everley well? Poirot asked. Well enough, she said. He managed the estate's trusts, a tedious but necessary man. Were you aware he was romantically involved with anyone here? She raised an eyebrow. You think one of us would stoop to that? Sometimes, Poirot said gently, a woman in a gilded cage sees the key more clearly than the bird outside it. Her lips twitched. Your metaphors are charming, Monsieur Poirot, but unhelpful. Celia was next. She arrived with her gloves still on. Mrs. Braithwaite, Poirot said, did you write a letter to Mr. Everley? No, she said too quickly. Why would I? Because someone lured him to the maze last night. Her hands trembled. He said things. After Arthur died, he would linger. He thought I needed company. And did you? She looked down. Yes, but not from him. Then Caroline. She sat across from Poirot with a strange mix of ease and tension. You're new here, Poirot said, and yet you seem at home. She smiled. I adapt. Did you know Mr. Everley? Well enough to borrow books. We shared a taste for poetry. And perhaps for secrets. Her smile faded. No, he followed me once. That's all. Where? To the maze. Poirot sat back. You see, mademoiselle, I believe someone meant to meet him there, but not for love, for silence. Act 2 ended with a discovery. In Thomas's study, Poirot found a box of letters. Most were bills, dry legalese, but one, hidden beneath a stack of newspaper clippings, was addressed to Lady Cassandra, dated 18 years earlier. You must never speak of this again. The child is not his, but he will never know. I am leaving. I trust you to do what must be done. It was signed by a name no longer spoken in Braithwaite Hall, Isabella, Cassandra's sister. Poirot called for Hastings. You remember the garden statue? He asked. The one of the woman with the rose. Yes, what of it? There was a date beneath the base, 1907, the year of Celia's birth. Meaning? Meaning, mon ami, she was never Arthur's child. She was Isabella's, hidden to preserve reputation. And Thomas knew? Poirot nodded. He found the letter. He threatened Cassandra. Unless she confessed, he would reveal everything. Not out of cruelty, out of some warped justice. But Cassandra is not a woman to be threatened. Act 3 arrived with the chill of morning. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing-room once more. The letter lay on the mantel now, open, exposed. This letter, he said, was not meant for Mr. Everley. It was meant for the person who found it. It was placed in his pocket after he died. A misdirection. He turned to Cassandra. You saw him in the maze. You argued. He turned to leave. You pushed him, a single step. But the fall was enough. Cassandra stood slowly. He wanted to ruin us. For what? Some half-forgotten mistake. Poirot stepped forward. It was not about ruin. It was about truth. But instead, you wrote a new fiction, with a rose, a letter, and a pocket. Celia covered her mouth, tears rising. Caroline whispered, all this time. Cassandra's voice was firm. I protected this family. Poirot looked at her, a strange sadness in his eyes. You protected the lie. And now it buries the dead. As the constables took her away, the house felt hollow. Hastings broke the silence. Love letters, murder, secrets. Is there anything this place doesn't hide? Poirot stared at the empty hearth. Ah, mon ami, he said, sometimes the deepest wounds are not written in ink, but in the words that never reached the one they were meant for. Chapter 9. Her alibi was perfect. Too perfect. The scream came at 10:17 p.m. Sharp, the kind that doesn't echo, but stops time dead in its tracks. A moment before, everything had been still. Candles flickering gently against old wood-panelled walls, a gramophone turning out a melancholic waltz in the corner, and somewhere down the corridor, the soft laughter of guests pretending not to notice the tensions they were drowning in wine. And then that sound, a piercing cry, sharp as broken glass, and it was as though the walls of Donley Manor took a breath and held it. By the time Poirot reached the study, the fire had dimmed low, casting long, distorted shadows on the carpet. Blood pooled beneath the armchair near the bookcase, dark, spreading, reflective in the firelight. Dr. Geoffrey Armitage, physician to the powerful, had been stabbed once in the back, clean between the shoulders, just beneath the collar of his dinner jacket. His spectacles lay several feet away, twisted. A half-empty glass of scotch stood undisturbed on the desk, beside an envelope addressed in his hand. To be opened in the event of my death. Poirot stood motionless for a moment, eyes sweeping the room. It was too clean, too deliberate. The scene had the precision of someone who knew anatomy and how to leave no fingerprints. But the clue came not in what was left behind, but what wasn't. There were 2 chairs by the fireplace, one pushed out, the other drawn close. The rug beneath it had been brushed recently. There were no impressions from shoes, and yet the ashtray beside it contained a lipstick-stained cigarette, still smouldering. Poirot turned slowly to the hallway. A maid hovered nearby, pale, gripping a tea tray. "Who discovered the body?" he asked softly. "Miss Everleigh," the maid whispered. "She screamed. She said she came to deliver a note." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A note?" "Yes, monsieur. From Mr. Carrigan." He nodded. "Bring Miss Everleigh to the drawing-room, and tell no one else." Not yet. Camilla Everleigh was waiting when Poirot entered. Tall, elegant, with the kind of poise taught at finishing schools and sharpened by years of moving through rooms filled with men and secrets. She sat calmly, too calmly, a handkerchief folded with clinical precision in her lap. "You were the first to see the body?" Poirot asked. "Yes," she said. "I was on my way to give him a message. When I entered, he was already like that." "And who sent you?" "Mr. Carr. He wanted to speak to Geoffrey privately." Poirot tilted his head. "And where were you at the time of the murder?" Her eyes met his, without flinching. "With Lady Montrose, in the parlour, from 10 until the scream." Poirot said nothing. He let the silence settle between them, like dust. "Lady Montrose can confirm," he said at last. "Of course," she replied. "We were discussing her trip to Paris. You may ask her." And he did. Lady Montrose, still in her silver brocade gown, nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Camilla was with me the entire time. I offered her sherry. We sat by the fire. I was reading a letter. She was sketching." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Sketching?" "Yes," Camilla interjected. "I draw to calm myself." "I see," Poirot murmured. He did not question her further, because it was, as Hastings would say later, too perfect. She had anticipated the questions, planted answers like breadcrumbs. Even the sketches were ready, 3 sheets of the parlour's fireplace, dated and signed in the corner. Act 1 had concluded. A murder, a scream, an alibi built like a fortress. But Poirot knew. When an alibi is too airtight, it suffocates the truth within. That night, as the rain began to lash against the windows, Poirot returned to the study. He examined the victim again. His hands had no defensive wounds, no struggle. That meant he knew the killer, trusted them, or was expecting them. He checked the glass of scotch, untouched, curious. He moved to the fireplace and examined the mantel. Dust lined the upper shelf, except one corner where it had recently been wiped clean. There, faintly, the outline of a small velvet box. Poirot turned. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "Not just murder, a broken engagement." In Dr. Armitage's room upstairs, Poirot found the missing box. Inside, a ring. Emerald, square-cut, elegant and old. A tag. "To C.E. My future. Camilla Everleigh." In the hallway, Hastings waited. "You think she killed him?" "No," Poirot said. "Not yet. But she knew." Act 2 brought new tension. The suspects were clear. Jonathan Carr, ambitious, envious, newly promoted head of the estate's finances. Motive? Money. The doctor had recently revised the Braithwaite will. Lady Montrose, a dowager of cunning, whose son had once been declared unfit for inheritance due to Dr. Armitage's psychiatric evaluation. Camilla Everleigh, the woman with the perfect alibi, a broken engagement ring, and a reason to silence a man who might have exposed her. But the red herring arrived in the form of a letter, delivered by hand, unmarked. He knew too much. He said he would reveal everything. He found the report. He couldn't be allowed to speak. The letter was unsigned, typed, and reeked of theatre. Poirot laid it aside. The next morning, he returned to Lady Montrose's suite. "I have questions," he said. She sat at her vanity, brushing her silver hair. "You may ask," she said. "What did Dr. Armitage know?" She paused. "About my son?" "Yes. He knew he wasn't mad, that he had been misdiagnosed, but the damage was done." "Then you had reason to hate him." She turned. "No, I pitied him. He did what he was told." Poirot frowned. "Told? By whom?" She blinked. "I assumed you knew Jonathan Carr. He falsified the second report to secure the inheritance for himself." The second twist, the red herring dissolved. Poirot confronted Carr in the smoking lounge. "You bribed the doctor?" "I offered him an opportunity," Carr replied. "He refused. He said he'd undo the damage. I warned him, don't make enemies." "But someone else heard the conversation," Poirot said. "Someone who had more to lose." Carr narrowed his eyes. Camilla. Act 3 unfolded like a wound unraveling. Poirot gathered them in the study. The crime, he began, was not one of passion, but of design. It was planned, executed with precision. But the key, mes amis, is the alibi. He turned to Camilla. "You were never in the parlor. The sketches, prepared earlier. The letter, fabricated. Lady Montrose, unknowingly, gave you an hour of freedom." Camilla stood. "That's absurd." "No," Poirot said. "That is murder." He held up the ring box. "He proposed. You declined. But worse, you were not the woman he loved. That was the secret. There was another, and he was ending everything." Camilla's face cracked. "He was going to ruin me." Poirot nodded. "So you planted the alibi, entered the study, struck him, and placed the letter, the sketch, the cigarette. All perfect. Too perfect." Camilla said nothing more. The constables took her quietly. Outside, the storm began to clear. Hastings joined Poirot by the fire. "She almost fooled us." Poirot smiled faintly. "Almost. But in every lie too carefully crafted, there is always one thread left loose." He looked to the empty chair where the doctor had once sat, and softly he said, "When an alibi is perfect, it is the murderer who built it." Chapter 10. The whisper that broke Poirot's silence. The whisper came just as the candles died. Not loud, not even clear, more breath than word, more tremor than voice. But it was enough. Enough to stop Hercule Poirot mid-step in the corridor of Alston House. Enough to make him turn, slowly, toward the darkness that waited near the grandfather clock, its brass pendulum long since stilled. "He knows," it said. "Only that. No face, no footfall, just a voice trailing away, like smoke in a room too still to hold it." Poirot froze. He had not spoken for 3 days, not since the incident in the crypt, when the blood was found and the will rewritten, and every lie in the room turned out to be rehearsed. Hastings had grown worried. "You're quiet, old man. Too quiet. It's not like you." But Poirot had simply nodded, fingers steepled, mind working silently beneath his still surface. He was listening, not to what people said, but to what they didn't. That was the key to Alston. Now standing in the corridor, he breathed slowly. A whisper, a voice he did not recognize, and yet something familiar about the tone, the hesitation, the fear. He walked forward without a word, past the dead clock, past the half-shut door of the nursery where no child had played in 20 years, and into the study where 3 guests and 1 corpse waited for him to speak. The body was Henry Talbot, banker, bon vivant, collector of secrets. Found that. Morning slumped over the writing desk with a letter opener in his back, the blade embedded with unnerving precision between the 3rd and 4th vertebra. No sign of struggle, no blood trail, no broken glass or overturned furniture. Only a single piece of torn paper in his hand, and a gramophone softly spinning with no needle engaged. Poirot approached the body in silence. The torn paper contained only 3 words. "You promised me." Promise. Such a dangerous word in a house full of inheritance, debt, and betrayal. Gathered in the study were the 3 who had last seen Talbot alive. First, Lady Frances Montclair, hostess of the gathering, a woman who wore grief like she wore her pearls, visible, deliberate, perfectly arranged. She claimed to have been in the garden conservatory, tending her orchids when the scream came. Second, Mr. Hugh Dellington, a novelist, once famed, now desperate, whose work Talbot had once praised publicly and privately blackmailed. Third, Miss Iris Crane, governess-turned-secretary, with a sharp gaze and a silence that rivaled Poirot's own. She had served in the household for 3 years and claimed to have been organizing correspondence in the West Wing during the murder. 3 witnesses, all with motives, all with alibis. And yet Poirot knew. One had whispered to him in the corridor. One had broken under the weight of what came next. "Mr. Talbot," Poirot said softly, still facing the body, "was not killed for what he did last night. He was killed for something long past, something buried." He turned to them at last, and his voice, unused for days, was suddenly sharper than ever. "You will forgive me. I have been quiet, reflecting, listening. But the whisper, the whisper, it has changed everything." Lady Frances looked up. "A whisper, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes," he replied, "a whisper that came not from guilt, but from fear." Act 1 had been the crime. Now in Act 2, suspicion danced. He began with Lady Frances. "You were fond of Mr. Talbot?" "I tolerated him," she said. "He was useful, financially and socially." Poirot nodded. "And did you not once lose a significant sum in his investment firm?" Her face remained still. "That was a misunderstanding. We settled it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. So did he promise to erase the debt in exchange for something? She hesitated. What are you implying? Poirot moved to Hugh Dellington. And you, monsieur, were promised a foreword for your next book, were you not? In exchange for remaining silent about a certain incident in Morocco? Dellington stiffened. That was years ago, and it was never proven. Ah, Poirot said, but still, it lingers, like the smell of opium in a sealed box. Then to Iris Crane, and you, mademoiselle, what promise did he make to you? She didn't answer. Poirot nodded. No matter. The answer will find us. He returned to the study, that night alone. The desk drawer was locked, but the key had been hidden in the base of the inkwell. Clever, but not clever enough. Inside, he found a photograph. Black and white, blurred with age, a child, a boy, a birth certificate clipped behind it. Name, Jonathan Talbot. Mother, Iris Crane. Father, unknown. Poirot closed his eyes. Act 3 arrived with a storm that rattled the old windows like bones in a box. He summoned them again. This time, his voice was calm, but final. The killer, he began, did not strike in anger. They struck in despair. Mr. Talbot had a habit of promising everything and delivering nothing. He had lied to each of you, but only one lie, I believe, truly shattered a soul. He turned to Iris Crane. You were promised acknowledgement. Not money, not reputation, only recognition of your son. And he refused. Again. He tore up the birth certificate, called the boy a misstep. And so you waited. You knew his habits, his routine. When he'd listen to music, when he'd leave the door ajar. She stood. He said my boy would never carry his name. Poirot bowed his head. And so, with a letter opener meant for correspondence, you delivered a reply. The room was silent. Poirot looked once more toward the corridor where the whisper had reached him. Why did you whisper it, mademoiselle? She answered softly. Because you would understand. You always do. Poirot let the constables take her without fanfare. Later, Hastings found him staring into the fire. You all right? He asked. Poirot nodded slowly. Sometimes the truth, mon ami, is not spoken with pride or rage. Sometimes it is whispered, and that whisper tells you more than all the shouted lies. He sipped his cocoa in silence, and the house, finally, was quiet. Chapter 11. He was alive when the curtains closed. The applause came late, too late. The audience clapped as though by obligation, not delight, their hands echoing faintly in the ornate velvet box of the Royal Thespian Theatre. It was a private performance, a charity revival of the death of Julian Gray. And the cast had given their bows, the orchestra had stilled, and yet something hung in the air that did not belong to the script. It was a silence beneath the sound, a tension that hummed through the gilt molding of the walls and trembled in the long velvet drapes. Then came the scream from backstage, shrill, human, and real. Poirot rose instantly. He had been seated 2 rows from the stage, his ticket acquired through Lady Whitcomb, one of the patrons. Hastings beside him stood slower, confused. It's part of the show, he asked. Poirot did not answer. The scream had already told him all he needed. The final act was not fiction. Backstage, the cast and crew huddled in a blur of half costumes and makeup smudges. The lead actor, Miles Fenwick, lay slumped against a tall red curtain, his body crumpled awkwardly, still clad in the costume of Lord Julian Gray. A dagger protruded from his abdomen, theatrical in placement, but all too real in depth. A pool of blood had already begun to soak into the fringe of the curtain behind him. Poirot knelt carefully, adjusting his gloves. The curtain closed at precisely 10:36 p.m., he said, and according to the program, that is exactly when the final spotlight fades on Lord Julian's death scene. But that's just stage business, whispered Hastings. Non, Poirot murmured. That is timing. And murder, mon ami, is always a matter of timing. He looked to the body. Miles Fenwick's eyes were still open, glazed in confusion. He had died suddenly, but not immediately. There were no defensive wounds. And yet the position of the knife told a story, a close attack from someone he knew, or someone he trusted. A prop knife was missing from the weapons table, but the one in his chest was real, older, heavier, and he had in fact stood for the curtain call. Poirot was certain of it. He had bowed, smiled faintly, then stepped into the wings, which meant he was alive when the curtain closed. The suspects gathered quickly. First, Clarissa Vale, the leading lady, cool, precise, beloved on stage, but whispered to have hated Miles with the venom only lovers-turned-rivals can muster. She claimed to have been in the dressing room removing her makeup at the time of the murder. Second, Jasper Rowe, the understudy, ambitious, long overlooked, and now shaking like a leaf. I was downstage, he said. I never even saw him backstage. I swear. Third, Felix Hargrove, the director, genius, temperamental, obsessive. No one leaves the wings until I say so, he barked. Miles was supposed to die in the spotlight, not the shadows. Poirot questioned them in turn. Clarissa blinked at the accusation. Yes, I disliked him. We all did. He was impossible to work with. But stab him? Don't be absurd. And in costume? What a ghastly metaphor. Indeed, Poirot said, but metaphor is the soul of the theatre. Jasper was trembling. I wanted the role, yes, but not like this. I was nowhere near him. I didn't even bow. They cut me from curtain call, remember? Felix paced. He changed the final line. Improvised it. Again. I told him not to. He said something about the curtains, about someone watching from the other side. It wasn't in the script. Poirot frowned. He said that on stage? Yes, Felix replied. Last line of the play. Looked directly into the box seat. Box 7, I think. Hastings checked the playbill. Box 7 was reserved for Lady Whitcomb. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then I must speak with her, he said. Lady Whitcomb, still clutching her opera gloves in the lobby, seemed dazed. He looked straight at me, she said, right before the curtain dropped, and he said, there are some ghosts even velvet can't hide. It made no sense. I thought it was poetry. Poirot murmured, non. It was confession. Backstage, he re-examined the scene. He noticed something subtle, a second blood trail, faint, leading not to the wings, but toward the prop staircase used in Act 2. A passage behind it led to the costume room, and inside, a bloodied stage glove, discarded behind a trunk. Not Miles's glove. It was Clarissa's. Poirot summoned her again. This glove, he said, was not dropped. It was hidden. Why? She stared at it. It isn't mine. I mean, it looks like mine, but... Poirot cut her off. Let me tell you what happened, madame. Miles Fenwick stepped into the wings, alive. Someone followed him. Someone who used the chaos of the blackout to switch a prop with a real knife. They did not mean to strike him. On stage, no. They waited. Until applause. Until distraction. He turned now to Felix. The final line. The one not in the script. Who wrote it? Felix blinked. He said it was his addition. From a letter, Poirot nodded. Then the letter still exists. In Miles's dressing room, they found it. Torn, folded, buried under an edition of Macbeth. You promised me I'd never have to see her again. You swore it. But now she's in the wings, watching. I can feel her eyes. Through the velvet. If the curtain falls tonight, it falls on me. Poirot stared long at the letter, then turned to the group. There was no ghost in the box, but there was guilt. A very real one. He looked now at Jasper Rowe. You were not cut from curtain call, were you? You stood behind the curtain, just out of light, watching. You switched the knife. You wore Clarissa's glove to mask fingerprints. And then you stepped back into darkness. Jasper broke. He ruined me. He said, 10 years of loyalty, and he mocked me, belittled me. He said I'd die in shadows, so I made sure he did. Poirot nodded gravely. And in doing so, you ensured your own fall. The police took Jasper in silence. Later that evening, Hastings sat with Poirot in the box. You knew it wasn't Clarissa from the start. We, Poirot said, because her alibi was too thin, too convenient, but also because the glove was placed where no actress would leave it, behind a cica's trunk, out of sight. He sipped his cocoa, then added, but what truly revealed the truth was the curtain. How so? Poirot looked toward the stage, now dark, now silent. Because Miles Fenwick was alive when the curtain closed. He bowed, he smiled, and then he delivered a line, meant not for the audience, but for his killer. He rose. The theatre, mon ami, is full of illusions. But death never forgets its cue. Chapter 12. Poirot found the lie hidden in the truth. The fire had gone out, and yet the study was warm, uncomfortably so. Perhaps it was the tension, thick as the smoke, that still hung faintly in the curtains. Poirot stood alone at the window, watching the first pale rays of morning crawl across the frost-dusted lawn of Elmridge House. Below, the lake was still, too still. The wind had stopped some hours ago, but Poirot had not moved. He was waiting, for silence, for clarity, for one more truth to twist upon itself and finally reveal the lie buried beneath it. Behind him lay the confession, signed, stamped, folded neatly atop the desk where Henry Danforth had been found dead 3 days earlier, a bullet in his heart and a glass of untouched port by his hand. The police had come, the will had been read, and everyone had seemed ready to believe the story that tied the entire thing up with a ribbon. A suicide, motivated by shame and guilt, triggered by the discovery of a financial scandal. All the evidence said so. Every guest at Elmridge said so. Even Hastings, reluctant as always to doubt the clear. But Poirot did not believe the clear. He believed the odd crease in a curtain, the faint print of a right-handed man lifting a left-handed pistol, the single petal of a red camellia found crushed beneath the decanter, not a flower found anywhere else in the house. And most of all, he believed what wasn't in the confession. Hastings entered, coat still buttoned against the cold. "They're leaving today," he said. "Lady Whitford, Mr. Channing, even young Alice. The train's booked. I suppose we can't detain them any longer, not without cause." Poirot turned slowly. "And yet they will not board that train, mon ami. Not all of them. You found something?" Poirot nodded once. "Not something. Someone, or rather, what someone hoped I would never see." the night before, had delivered the final clue. A scrap of torn lace caught on the edge of the attic door, odd in itself, since the attic had been locked for over 20 years. When Poirot climbed the creaking stairs, he found only dust and moth-bitten trunks. But among them was a letter not meant for Henry Danforth, but addressed to Lady Whitford. The handwriting was unmistakably Henry's, dated only 2 days before his death. I know now what you and Charles did, how it all began. I will not remain silent. This house deserves better, and Alice must be told. Lady Whitford, widow of Lord Whitford, carried a reputation of elegance and cold virtue. Her nephew, Charles Channing, was all charm and immaculate lies, and Alice Danforth, the girl at the heart of it, was neither. 19. Pale, watchful, too quiet for a girl who had lost her father to suicide. Poirot had not spoken to her much, but he had watched. She walked with precision. She avoided mirrors, and once, when Hastings said something dismissive about the notion of murder, she flinched, as if struck. Poirot now gathered them in the drawing-room, the room where the will had been read, the room where the confession had been quietly accepted by everyone except him. He stood before the fireplace and folded his hands. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "I must ask your indulgence. This will not be comfortable, but truth seldom is." They sat, Lady Whitford with a sigh, Charles with a smirk, Alice alone, eyes downcast. "I have read the confession," Poirot began. "It is written clearly, too clearly. It fits the evidence perfectly, too perfectly, and like all things that are too perfect, it is false." Lady Whitford arched a brow. "Are you suggesting Henry did not write it?" "Oh, he wrote it," Poirot said, "but not the night he died. He wrote it 6 months ago, during an episode of what he believed to be moral weakness. He never sent it. He tore it up. But someone who wanted him dead, reassembled the fragments and planted it as proof of suicide." Charles laughed softly. "And who, may I ask, would go through such trouble?" Poirot's voice hardened. "The person who had the most to lose if Henry exposed the truth. Not about money, about family, about Alice." A silence fell. Poirot turned to Lady Whitford. "You told Alice she was Henry's daughter, raised her as such, but she is not. She is yours, and Charles's." Lady Whitford stood, abruptly. "That is outrageous." "No," Poirot said quietly. "It is fact. Alice was born in Switzerland, not England. Her birth certificate was altered. Henry discovered the truth after finding a letter in your desk. He confronted you. He threatened to tell her. You begged for time. But Charles..." He now looked at the man, whose face had gone pale. "Charles never wanted the truth to come out, not because of shame, but because Alice stood between him and the inheritance. If she was proven not to be Henry's, she had no claim. And he would be heir once more." Poirot stepped toward the decanter table. "The gun was yours. You used gloves. You forged the scene. But one thing betrayed you. The camellia. You wore it in your buttonhole that night, and when you reached for the port, the petal fell. Henry never drank, but you poured 2 glasses, one for him, one to sell the illusion." Charles stood. "This is slander." Poirot reached into his coat and withdrew the letter from the attic. "This is Henry's letter, the one meant for Alice, hidden, not burned, because he wanted her to know." He turned now to the girl. "And you, mademoiselle, you already suspected." Alice's voice trembled. "I knew." I saw Charles leave father's room that night. I told myself he was just talking to him. But the lock had been broken. Poirot nodded. I could not accuse him, Alice whispered. I didn't want to believe it. Poirot stepped back. The truth, mademoiselle, was never meant to destroy, only to free. Charles lunged, but the constables, summoned earlier, entered swiftly. He was taken. Lady Whitford remained seated, eyes wet but hard. When it was over, Hastings said nothing for a long while. Finally, he asked, "How did you know the confession wasn't real?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because, mon ami, it gave me everything I wanted, too easily. A real truth is never convenient. It resists. It hides. And it waits for someone who sees the lie inside the truth." He turned to the window, where the morning had fully arrived. And as the frost melted on the glass, Poirot whispered, "It is not enough to find what is true. One must also ask, who wanted it found?"